Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. Today, I have a surprise, but not a crazy good one like, I don't know, someone gifted me a A7R4 or 5 or whatever. A poopy one, like I stepped in doggy doo-doo. I picked up this freaking thing, the SVP PS9890 Films Scanner. It's not just a film scanner, it's a films scanner, according to their own website. I did pick this up at a thrifty store, as you can see here. It was a cool $7.99. And oddly enough, in the packaging, this thing actually looks pretty brand new, even though I'm pretty sure this particular thing was made somewhere in the 2010s. So it's been a little while since it was new. And I know what you're thinking. You got an old film scanner. Big mistake. If you bought one of those new Kodak Scanzas or Minolta Revive 5s, they're probably better due to the march of progress and all that. Probably not, though. I'm actually willing to bet that inside those things, it's probably basically the same parts that's inside this thing. Now, I do understand, for the most part, these kind of film scanners aren't really aimed at film enthusiasts, camera people. I get they're aimed at someone who might just not really care about image quality and just wants to quickly archive old photos and isn't looking to be burdened by complicated solutions. But who hasn't looked at one of these things and wondered, how bad could it be? Really, is it worth trying? And I've actually also been personally asked about these kind of devices in the past, and sometimes even in the now times. So, if you're one of those people that have asked me about my opinion on these, this is for you. And if you're wondering, do I recommend these at all? No, of course not. And if that's all you wanted to know, feel free to click away now. Otherwise, let's crack this open and get into it. These are camera scanners, but in the worst way. I've seen these around forever, from the bad old days of the Wolverine F2D, film to digital, get it? Good joke. To the modern Kodak scan-in slide. Admittedly, every film scanner is basically something that can take a picture of film and process it. It's the basic concept. I assume people are familiar with this. However, there are generally a couple ways that we see film being scanned. And we'll go over that first. A bit of a setup before we actually dive into the hunk of turd that is this thing. And firstly, I want to talk about your dedicated film scanners. You know, the ones that I tend to make videos about, the expensive rectangular boxes that just do one thing. They take a long time, make a lot of noises, and tend to be kind of pricey. These are specialized machines, and they tend to spare no expense when it comes to capturing a film image. They use typically pretty high resolution line scanning CCDs, precision motors, precision rails to move things along. They usually have dedicated optical assemblies and typically incorporate some sort of focusing mechanism to ensure the image comes out as sharp as it can. This is typically where you expect a perfectionist or a pretty big film enthusiast to be. Most people, at least in the past, would have liked a dedicated film scanner, especially for 35mm or 120 film. Some examples of these obviously are the ones that I have, like the Nikon Cool Scans, your PlusTech 8200s, or 120 series, or your Minolta Scan Dual series scanners. The next common thing you tend to see is actually these things, flatbed scanners. they typically have a bit of trade-offs when compared to the dedicated film scanners. Obviously, you're able to scan more things, but you typically tend to lose the ability to autofocus. Line scanner densities might be a bit less, but what you tend to give up in those aspects, you make up with the fact that this thing can typically scan bigger, whoa, the mic, bigger things. Look at that scan bed. And look at the space it has for scanning film. This one can scan up to 4x5 large format. So obviously you have more flexibility with your flatbed scanners. And by the way, this one is the Epson 4870. These are pre-V700 series scanners, so it is a bit old. And in general, they offer pretty good scan quality. And again, the flexibility is really key here because there isn't really a dedicated film scanner for large format. At least not one that I am aware of that's commercially available. And again, some of the trade-offs are that since you don't have autofocus, you typically have to work around manually adjusting things like using shims if you want to get that perfect scan. And a lot of the times, these also work pretty well for 35mm or 120. They just tend to be a little less good than those dedicated systems, in my opinion. Next, and obviously one very popular choice, camera scanning. Using a DSLR, mirrorless camera, or a phone to photograph your film. It's very flexible, it's very quick, and in a lot of cases, you use stuff you already have, so you aren't necessarily picking up a dedicated piece of hardware, which is kind of nice. Now, the trade-off for this is that setup at times can be pretty fiddly, and you do still need a bit of dedicated hardware. Things like film holders, lights for illuminating your film, but overall, these tend to be cheaper solutions that offer pretty fast scanning abilities. What we're looking at with the SVP though, this is essentially a camera scanner. However, unlike normal camera scanners, where you put a camera on a camera stand and you can adjust things and do stuff, what you basically get with these things is a glorified webcam with plastic optics that usually tend to be macro or close focus lenses, and they tend to be very, very cheap sensors on even cheaper optics. Most of the times fixed focused, and light sources tend to also be pretty suspect. In the SVP's case, it's just labeled as being LEDs. Cool. It's basically taken all the complicated parts of actually scanning film and boiled them down into the cheapest, least technically complicated aspects and put them in a plastic box. And it's really the cost cutting that leads to these things being quite bad. The crappy sensor, the crappier optics, fixed focus, usually also pretty sloppy assembly and components. They really don't add up to be a great experience. Because conceptually, this is obviously a good idea. Camera scanning is typically pretty great, pretty flexible, and fast. And that's really the only thing that these things have going for them. They're as fast as camera scans when you get things set up. You put your film through, it takes a photo, and you chunk the film through really fast. I've taken this thing out of the box so we can look at the hardware. But this is it. It is a box. And oddly enough, I think this actually looks solid, but most of this is fluff. It is effectively a hollow, empty plastic box, and there is effectively a camera, sitting inside there. I don't know if you can see it, but you might be able to see the reflection of it in that pitch blackness. That's basically it. And aside from that, you really just have some acrylic sheets, some buttons, and a display for you to interface with it. And these are obscenely light. Like, this looks like it should be heavier, but it is very, very plasticky and cheap feeling. Another fun thing about this kind of thing is that I'm almost certain almost all of these are made by maybe just a handful of companies, maybe even just one. And whenever a company decides they want to make one of these, they get the package of parts and they just recase it in a shape that suits them. Usually, to give it an air of legitimacy, you slap on your brand and off you go. You get to take advantage of some brand loyalty that may not be earned. Looking at you, Minolta and Kodak. Now, I can't say this for sure, but I've seen other YouTubers reviewing this sort of thing, and in at least one of these videos where someone reviewed 3 units, it turns out 2 of the units were the same scanner in different plastic dresses. And yeah, I dug into mine a little bit, and I noticed some things that kind of point to this. We'll get into that later. The SVP PS9890. Now, the scanner I got, it's a 3-in-1 unit. You can do a couple things. You can scan regular prints via this flappy bit here. And you can also do slides and negatives through this slot there. Now, when you first unbox the thing, you actually get greeted with a bunch of things in a foam insert. And something that I think was kind of funny and kind of actually a nice touch was this stick. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is a plastic stick. Weird. What is that even for? Well, actually, a dedicated cleaning stick for this film scanner. And effectively, because you have your optic, oh boy, all the way in there, and sometimes you might get dust on that poopy camera. So, you can jam this thing in here, and then you can, I don't know if you can see, the stick, that's me right there. I can rotate, and I can clean the optic. Wow, that's a nice touch. Good stuff. Honestly, if only actual dedicated film scanners were this easy to clean. All right, that might be the only pro you'll hear about the scanner. Next up, you actually get what looks to be fairly nice dedicated film holders. I say they look nice because when you actually try to use them and open them up, they are quite poopy. After that, you do get things like this, which are guides for the actual photo scanning element of this. And you then get a USB power brick and a USB cord. And it turns out these, at least the one I got, actually will run on basically 5 watts of USB on a USB mini. I've actually tried this, and it will actually power up and run on a battery bank. I mean, it's not that surprising, I guess, because there's not really much to these, but I did think that these had to have like a AC wall adapter or a wall wart. So it's nice to see that this one was getting USB power. And mine is kind of old. It's actually using USB, not from a USB micro or USB-C, but from the old mini USB. I don't know if they can even focus on that. Ah, there we go. So it's kind of interesting. Now, as I mentioned previously, usually you operate everything through these buttons and screens. This may be hard to capture. Let's try though. And yeah, you can see you can scroll through. See if I can go to the capture setting. Oh yeah, yeah. Now you can see the screen. Oh, maybe not, it's kind of a bad screen. It is literally scanning itself. Good stuff. Now, on the back of these things, one of the things they do kind of tout is that you can operate these computerless, save directly to an SD card. And that's true. You can see on the back there, there's a little slot. right about here. There. That's where you can put in an SD card and directly save to it. Ah, I really gotta stop bumping my mic. I'm not used to having something so chunky and so light. Now, another thing that's kind of interesting about this is that it claims you can scan at 4,000 dpi. But if you actually look at it, it touts only a 14 megapixel imager. But when you go into the scan settings, you can select a resolution, and I don't know if you can see it, but one of the options is 22 megapixels. Now, looking into this, the sensor, I believe, actually is a 14 megapixel imager, which, if you're going by the scan area and pixel density, that is not 4,000 dpi. But if you select 22 megapixels via interpolation, you get 4,000 dpi interpolated. So, kind of? Anyways, it's weird. Yeah. All right. Scanning. Right. So let us have a look at these film holders, and we'll try to get a little bit of a demonstration how this works. So first thing, now, normally film holders aren't the greatest feeling thing to use. They are almost always a plastic affair with a lot of bend and flex, but these are exceptionally not great. It feels like when I'm opening, each time I open this, something may snap. It doesn't, but it feels like it will. Now, here it is, fully open, and we will load in some film. Now, all right, let's see. Here we go. So with the SVP, specifically this one, there is something interesting going on. You can see here, you may not be able to see, but the film is a little offset. And there's actually nothing I can do about it. In most film scanners, typically you have a little thing you can adjust, or there are ways where you can tune where the film is going so that the frame is actually lined up with the frame holder. On this particular one, there is no way. There is a piece of plastic that clips into where the sprocket holes are, and they are not movable. So if your frames do not exactly line up with where the sprocket alignment thingy is, you are kind of out of luck and you're going to lose some of that frame, which, as it turns out, isn't a big concern because when you are actually film scanning with this, it does kind of punch in more than you'd think. We'll see that in the samples. But yeah, it's a bit weird. But let us jam this into the film scanner, shall we? So I will move this into the film scanner mode. So you got this lever here, and you slide it there. And basically what it does is it switches from the print scanner mode into film scanning, and it turns off the LEDs that normally would shine through here, and a plastic piece slides over to illuminate the film from the other side. And there's LEDs pointing down against the film. And then now you can obviously close that, shove this thingy, make sure your film holder is closed all the way, shove your film holder into there, enter the capture mode, and there we have it. It is previewing the frame. And this is just a live view from the camera. I'll jiggle this, and you can see all the jiggliness. And to scan, we just hit that. You hit OK. And I think it... okay. I don't have an SD card in here, but you would hit this, you hit OK, and it'll save the image. Very straightforward. And you can just slide this all the way through, and you keep going. But here's something else you might have noticed. while this frame seems to be pretty good in there, there is actually quite a bit of slop in the frame holder as well. And it isn't actually too bad, but you can see that there's a bit of play, which I don't know if it's on purpose, because in some of the scans that I've done, I'd have had to slightly adjust the framing to make it work. Another kind of neat point is that when you're scanning, you can actually adjust the exposure on the fly. And you can see here, there's a little EV setting. You can go left or right to affect the way the scan will look. So there it is at +2 EV, and you see it's very bright. We'll go have a look and go to -2. And it will adjust. Dark. Now, I actually am not sure if the intensity of the LED is dimming or if it's just changing the exposure on the sensor, but either way, it does do the thing, and it's actually kind of a neat feature. Now, when you do actually do the scans, obviously this thing only outputs JPEGs. And when we have a look at the scans, we'll have them beside my actual real Minolta Scan Dual 4, not this revived Minolta Revive Bull Poopy. And the reason why we're doing this is because the Scan Dual 4 actually outputs a similar size image to the SVP. Another thing you will notice on especially the black and white ones, you can really see the limits of the dynamic range of the SVP. Whatever sensor they're using, it has the dynamic range of a potato. You can see that the shadow details get very crushed in these samples, much more so than on the Scan Dual 4. Now, when we look at the color shots, you kind of get even more flaws becoming evident. In the black and white, a lot of things kind of became hidden, like the noise, and we're gonna look at a couple that I took and scanned on this thing. There was a couple on like Kodak Gold 200, and when you look at these far away or when they're just on your desktop or whatnot, it looks kind of okay. The colors look a bit flat. They could just use a bit of punching up. But again, when you really zoom in, you do your 100% look, you can really see that there's a lot of splotchiness from the small, cheap sensor. Where on the Scan Dual, you can enjoy some film grain. On this thing, you just get noise and splotch. And it's kind of evident that the system is doing some sort of noise reduction to smooth things over, and it's not really working. And again, this is where it becomes very evident that the sensor in these things are just the bargainest of basement sensors. One of the other films I scanned was a Portra 160 VC. This one was a bit challenging because for most of these shots, I think I probably should have shot them +1, so they're a bit under. And for whatever reason, looking at the way the SVP scans it, it kind of gave the images a reverse vignette, which is pretty annoying, on top of the fact that the colors looked very muted starting off on that scan. The interesting bit. So let's circle back to why I think most of these are just probably done by one company or so. I noticed something when looking at the scans, the EXIF data. The company, SVP, clearly didn't really bother removing OEM information. I assume that something like the Kodak or Minolta ones, when you look at the EXIF on the scans, will come out proudly saying Kodak and the model name or whatever. However, on the SVP, they clearly are not the sharpest knife in the crayon set or whatever. When you click and have a look at the EXIF, instead, you get greeted with the brand Zoran and Coach. Neat. I have a coach, and their name is Zoran. Cool name, Zoran. Good stuff. But really, when you look into it, Zoran was actually a company, and they did do imaging and video processing ICs. They also did a lot of that stuff for TVs primarily. Other things as well, and eventually as their company grew, they got into cameras. Something like that. And this camera has been around for a while. They've been doing their business since around the 90s. And Zoran Coach is apparently a camera module of sorts. It stands for camera on a chip. Basically, it's supposed to be an integrated solution. All right, Zoran's not a coach. Or it is, but it isn't. It is a company that did imaging and video processing ICs. They did them for cameras, TVs, and other things. And they've been around for a while, and it seems that they were a pretty big company. And again, they've been doing stuff for a while, since the 90s. Zoran Coach, however, apparently specifically means camera on a chip. Essentially, this was an integrated solution for imaging, a one-stop shop camera, if you will. Want to build a camera, but kind of also not really? Buy a Zoran Coach and let them do the entirety of the camera thing for you. Slap an optic and build something around it. Put your own name on it. Call it done. The Zoran Coach way. At any rate, it's 2026 now, and Zoran is gone. Sounds like the villain was vanquished in a movie of some sort. At any rate, they actually merged with another firm in 2011, and that firm actually got bought in 2015 by Qualcomm. Yes, the same one that snaps our dragons. The ones that make all the little processors in our phonesies. Even more interesting is that by the time 2015 rolled about, the only parts of Zoran that remained in that first company that bought them, CSR, were actually the coach and imaging video bits of the company. So kind of interesting, and it kind of brings me to the question that are these newer machines basically just using Qualcomm branded versions of the coach chips, or are they a knockoff of them? If anyone has one of these and feels like busting it open, or digging into driver information a little more, please let me know, because I find this kind of interesting. And yeah, so it kind of makes sense to me that a lot of these other scanners that are effectively the same design, same mock-up, are probably they stem from this company. And again, part of that is because Kodak and Minolta, for a lot of their hardware now, I do think they are effectively just milking the brand. I don't think there's any engineers left in those firms doing development on these kind of products. And so it makes more sense to license the equipment out and slap a name on it. And that's why I do think that for the most part, when you get your Kodak Scanzas or whatever, these are all likely rebranded machines from possibly Qualcomm at this point. Recommendation and conclusion. Obviously, I don't recommend any of these kind of film scanner doohickeys. I actually think at this point, cell phone camera scans probably offer more flexibility and better quality than these things. And they will be a little bit cheaper since most people already have smartphones, and so you really just need the rig to hold the film and illuminate. On another note, smartphones also, if you have a flagship one, tend to have sensors that are at this point almost Type 1 sensors. So a lot of them are also considerably less poop than whatever's in these things. Heck, even mid-rangers like Samsung's A57 offer something like a 1/1.5 inch, and I'm sure the SVP sensor is no bigger than a ladybug's poops and just as good at taking photos. Not to entirely disparage these things, but I'm assuming that if you're watching me, you may enjoy photography. And these devices probably really aren't meant for you. If you are someone who has stumbled onto the channel and is looking to maybe rapidly and cheaply digitize some film for Facebook or the gram, if you will, maybe this might be up your alley. But even then, maybe just consider going to a film lab. They'll give you much better scans. You can enjoy the photos and their quality a bit more, and you won't have to buy one of these e-waste boxes. I honestly wouldn't have picked this up if it weren't for the fact that it was $8 thrifted, and I didn't think I could, if I didn't know I could make a video out of it, I would have passed on that anyways. And honestly, I think even if this thing came up at 20 bucks, I probably would have walked away. I would never pay the Amazon price of apparently $270 for one of these Kodak ones. At any rate, am I being too harsh on this thing? Has anyone else tried these boxes of disappointment? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, maybe a super thanks if you will. Until next time, bye.